Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome thankful for you all tuning in. Thanks for Morgoth for shilling beforehand with his much larger Telegram audience than myself. But today I thought that we would do something a little bit different and a little more, more something more grounded in what we do as people, and that is the wonderful joy of fishing. But before I get too far into it and explaining the reasons why I wanted to do this stream, Borgoth, thank you so much for coming on.
That's no problem. We've chatted about doing this for a while, so a bit more of a bit more of a comfy, relaxed stream as the Western world collapses around us. You know what I mean? It's just like the thing where the Spengler line where he's standing as the Mount Vesuvius, and he stands guard right up until the end. That's going to be me with a fishing rod, I think.
There's I don't know if you ever read any of the like Far Side, Gary Larson comic strips in the newspaper, but there's this one that has always stuck with me from the 80s where it's two men in a boat and they're fishing, and in the distance they can see the mushroom clouds of the bombs finally dropping, and he turns to his friend in the boat and he says, "You know what, guys? We're gonna go fishing all day long and screw the catch limit." And that's kind of how I feel sometimes when I'm out just fishing. That I'm going to talk about some weird goings on around the world, but here I can forget about all that.
Yeah, I mean that. Yeah, so I mean we can get into all that. That's part of the appeal. I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot. I think fishing gets a bad rep. I mean, there's mainly three stages to my fishing life, and on the most recent one that I'm into, which is sea fishing. When I took it up, I desperately wanted like my brother to come along. You know what I mean? I was like, we're gonna come on. Whenever like this bonding thing. And he was like, I can't it just sounds so boring. And this is why like people don't get it, because I think I can't think of anything more boring than like just sitting on the edge of a riverbank with a fishing rod or on the shoreline or whatever it happens to be, like just sitting there for hours and hours. And I thought, yeah, but that's the whole point. The whole point's that it's boring.
Yeah.
You're relaxing.
Well, it is the whole point, and I've been told it's a lot like baseball fans in America, where you're watching for sort of the patient thrill of it all. That's the reason why you enjoy the game. But I'm not really a sports guy anymore, so that's sort of the thing. But the boring thing has always stuck with me is the criticism. I told Morgoth this beforehand, but I wanted to tell the audience who's listening that the one of the reasons why I wanted to do this stream is because I was sitting in like the sort of the back lot for Unpopular Opinions one time when Carl Benjamin was on, and I was asked offhandedly how was the fishing going, and I was just explaining about recording for a video, and Carl is just like, oh, I find fishing to be so boring. So really, it's one of those like villain origin story moments that this stream has, is that I wanted to tell Carl Benjamin that fishing isn't boring and he should take it up one of these days.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of much else better to do. I even love all of the culture about fishing as well. That is, even like in like years and years ago when I was a kid, there'd be shows on TV. There was one, I forgot his name now. He was like a little chubby fella with a beard, and he would just go around England by himself with somebody with a cameraman. I forgot his name now. I wish I don't know if he's still alive. He's probably dead now. But anyway, I mean, I would just sit and watch the program. Even just watching the program, I thought this is like a different world. This is so relaxing. You know what I mean? And he's just he mainly did freshwater fishing around England, and it was just the whole ceremony of it, the whole explaining what bait he was using, explaining why he was going to take a certain, like why he was going to this part of a river bank and not the other part, and there's so much deep lore to it, and there's so much to learn. There's always something more to uncover, and I mean, despite all that, like my recent stint of fishing it began about 6 years ago, 5 years ago, and it began just like catastrophically wrong. It was just disastrous. But originally, when I was a boy, my first fishing kind of thing was I had an uncle on the west coast of Scotland, on a really quite remote area where he worked on the land. and he had a boat. And that was basically my summer holidays. And I went up on the boat with him when I was a boy, with like a family thing. And he used to take me out on the boat, and we used to go. We used to fish, and we used to get. And I actually used to catch stuff as well. Like I used to get rainbow trout, and I remember one time I got this huge dogfish, which is still like the best thing I've ever caught because it's like a shark. And then it was like this little thing where he was getting kind of pissed off because I was actually catching more fish than him, and he dropped me off. So on the west coast of Scotland, it's like all mountains. It isn't like an open sea. It's all just sort of winding around mountains and islands. It's just absolutely beautiful. And it used to confuse me because my idea of the sea was just open water, but it wasn't like that. And what he did, I needed to take a pee, and he dropped me off on an island and just left me there for about 2 hours with the fishing rod as well. And he was like, the idea was is sort of punish me and scare me a bit, you know what I mean? He went off on the boat and then came back later because I'd caught more fish than him. So there was all these nice things, and so you just fall in love with the landscape and the tranquility of it all. And then my second stint of fishing that I took up was freshwater, and that was when I lived on the continent, and mainly in the Benelux countries, because they've got a lot of canals. And so I took up, and then I was like, some of it was those big pond things where they stock them. And then there was a lot of like the canal fishing where it was mainly like carp. And I've always thought carp is like, it's just like a pig. I mean, they're just disgusting fish. You can't eat them. The meat's like sandpaper. And I didn't really used to catch them as well. They used to pull them out, and they were like the size of small dogs. And I don't know, he just didn't get any satisfaction from it at all. And then the other thing that they did, which I did over there, was fishing from like stocked things, and where they drive along with a golf cart and dump it in. And I found that actually repulsive because it ended up where I ended up with about like 15 trout just in a pile on the riverbank because we were using that power bait stuff, the putty, and I was just pulling them out like literally every 5 minutes. And I thought there's no sport in this like whatsoever. I just thought it was a slaughter, and I think it spoiled the challenge of it. You know what I mean? And then more recently, I took up sea fishing again, which was like the opposite. So it's like it seems almost impossible to catch one. It's the total opposite from what I did. But I'll tell the tale of me how I got back into took up the sea fishing because that didn't go well at all at the start.
Yeah, for me though, it was always just something I kind of grew up with. In America, there's a bit more of I guess, a different culture. Mainly just I think due to that sort of middle America versus the coasts deal, where if you're wanting to get into this, there's a sponge of sporting channel personalities. There is of course the ever so memed Bass Pro Shop, just as a company where they also they have sponsored events and tournaments. Last summer, there was actually about maybe an hour and some odd drive away. They were having the Bassmaster Classic, and so these large competitions for professional guys with their sponsored gear, both in terms of tackle, what kind of rods that they're using, or their boats have the specific kind of fish finding radar. But for me, I just grew up with it with my dad, and it was something that anytime that we were near a body of water, he grew up in the country, so it was just something that came with me. Some of my earliest memories, like when my dad worked in DC, was just they going to the local lakes and doing fishing tournaments and things like that. And so it's been just a part of it for so long. Coming back to living out in the country once more, because I'd lived in El Paso for like a decade. It was really no fishing unless you really wanted to wait for the season when the Rio Grande would finally rise up for a little bit and you could fish, but there wasn't much there. So I kind of came back now to where I am and finally took it back up again, because on the land where we live, there's a pond, and I don't live too far from some major rivers and other bodies of water. So I haven't had any experience of like saltwater or any sort of sea fishing, but just that freshwater American love for catfish or bass is very much with me.
Yeah, I mean, somebody in the chat saying go fly fishing. Where I live, there's nowhere to go fly fishing. I'd have to travel really far for that. It's a little bit strange in England. I don't know how it is in America. Like, do you have to pay like a sort of sub or a fee so that you can fish in a place for a year or that kind of thing?
It varies state by state. So, like Texas, you are required to buy a fishing license. So the license meme does apply to us in Texas for hunting and fishing. But it also depends on like what body of water. You can buy like a general fishing license, or you can buy like a pass for a certain body of water. But it's something that we have to deal with.
Yeah, it's something similar, yeah, except for the sea where there's no you can just turn up with your rod. There doesn't seem to be any restrictions on that at all. I mean, it is. I know that like you've got to have a license for everything in England, but when it comes to sea fishing, they're kind of lax. Unless you're on a boat and then you hit all the bureaucracy. But if you're just casting from the shore or you're setting crab pots or something like that, you're not going to get bothered at all. They don't care. I don't think there's any way they could check up on it, to be honest.
Yeah, I wouldn't know though. I haven't made my opportunity to go down to like the Gulf of Mexico or off to the coast to go sea fishing, but that sounds like a nice unrequited way to just go to the coastline and set up a line.
There's a couple of quotes as well that I thought I picked them off the internet, and I thought they were just nice to set the tone here about like famous people who mainly from ecologists and whatnot, quotes on fishing. And there's one of them by Henry David Thoreau, who is, I believe, some kind of deep ecologist kind of guy.
He's sort of an American writer and philosopher. He's most
Yeah.
well known for writing Walden, where he spent like a year by Walden Pond.
And he said, many men go fishing all of their lives without knowing that it is not the fish they are after. And this is the thing, isn't it? Like this is the where you get into the good stuff, because it's like, is it really about catching the fish? And well, maybe we can get into that later. There's another one, Herbert Hoover. Fishing is much more than fish. It is the great occasion when we may return to the fine simplicity of our forefathers. And that's definitely true, isn't it?
Oh yeah, for sure.
And there was somebody called Carl Safina, who was an ecologist. I fished to scratch the surface of those mysteries, for nearness to the beautiful, and to reassure myself the world remains. So you can see the sentiment of fishermen here. It's very much of a romantic kind of thing, isn't it? It isn't just about how many fish have I killed today.
Yeah, there was one on Telegram that your story about being put off on the island sort of reminded me of. Growing up is realizing that talking doesn't scare the fish. It's that grandpa just wanted you to shut the hell up.
Yeah, yeah, that's true as well. I mean, when I came to take up the sea fishing again, I realized that I didn't really have the faintest idea what I was doing, despite that I'd fished a bit, you know what I mean? But because obviously when I was a boy, it was all done for me, and then the river fishing was kind of simple. And I just had so many disasters. Like I didn't even know that the line had like a memory. Do you know when you put it on the reel? So I bought all the stuff, and then I was putting the line on the reel. I'm saying this for anybody who's thinking about taking fishing up. Like if you're just on your own trying to figure it out with a couple of YouTube videos, or thinking that it's one hell of a steep learning curve. Like, and I made every mistake you can imagine, literally to the point where I'd like spool the reel, and then it was all just jumping back off. And I just couldn't understand why that was happening. I was furious. I just thought, how was that happening? So then I went down to cast out to the sea, but I didn't check about the tides. That didn't occur to me, because I thought, well, the sea's the sea. It's not going to go anywhere. Yeah, that's a total mistake. It depends entirely on the tides. So I turned up and there was no sea there. And I thought, well, what all there was like a foot of water and like lots of kelp. But I didn't even get that far because the dog was there, and the dog wears like a harness thing. And so my line, which was already trying to get it like come loose, because I'd put it on the wrong way, like I put it on backwards, and the hook ended up going through the dog's harness, and and the whole, and then the dog thought it was a game because I'm trying to chase after the dog. The line's coming off the reel, and I ended up where like there was on a shale beach where there was no water there anyway, and then like the whole reel just came loose across the shale. Like it was just one giant bird's nest all across. So all I could do was scoop it all back up, put it in a bag, and I didn't have anything else, so I just had to pack up and go home. Like I was absolutely that was like, oh well, I think I'll just give it up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was a nightmare of a day.
So for those that are wondering what we mean, because again, fishing's got a steep learning curve. So, you know, fishing lines that what we mean by like line, like it develops a memory. I mean, it sits on the spool, right? And you have to change, and it's monofilament lines, right? That you need to change every year or so, because if not, that's how you get your snarls. And when you're casting out, it can only go so far most of the time. There are ways to like get rid of it, but you can't ever get rid of it completely. And I mean, monofilament's good if you want to have a line that floats. There are braided lines that can last a lot longer, but I mainly use monofilament lines when I'm fishing myself.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I got the gist of that. And that was on the beach caster. And obviously I looked it up and I figured it out. But I've got two rods. I've got the beach caster. Well, I had it originally. I had a nice pen, 12-foot beach caster, but I smashed that in a rage. So the shaft broke because I was just I had to, you know, we'll get onto like the peace and tranquility stuff in a bit, but I smashed that by accident because I lost my temper with being snagged on something, and I hadn't actually fit it in properly. So what it is, like, if you've got a 12-foot rod with a heavy line on, that's going to take a hell of a pounding. But if so you'll get a 3-piece rod, it was, and so it's 3 pieces which slot together on like graphite. And then if it's not all the way in, the pivot point's like all to hell, and it'll just break. It'll just snap it. And so and like I was having like a spurg attack, and I just smashed that rod. And then I thought, I got a 10-foot. I've got a 10-foot beach caster, but then my favorite to play around with is the 9-foot spinning rod, which is really tough, and you can play the line a lot, and get the mackerel on that one more in this weather. But the beach castings I've kind of neglected a bit.
For me, I try to use the things that I like. I just grew up with familiarity. So, like, when I decided to finally take this back up again, and you were sort of the reason why I started doing the fishing videos for the channel. Like, I remember commenting on one of your early, you know, videos like 2 years ago, and just asking, like, "Oh, how did you what'd you do to set up your recording equipment there?" Again, but for me, I just picked up, I was like, okay, what do I remember using as like a kid? And that's sort of what I mainly use a lot nowadays, is like these old Zebco 33 types where I can just easily, you know, click button, send out and release and reel back in. But I mean, it's good either way because of wherever I'm fishing at. I usually don't have to cast too far for where I'm going, which is nice in that regard. So I can always just put out live bait if I want to, and I can set up my lures accordingly, especially with season. So I got to wait right now until it gets, when the sun begins to come down, because it's just too hot where I live. It's like 100 degrees, some odd Fahrenheit now. So it's close to what is that, about 40 or high 30s for Celsius. So I got to wait, usually late into the evening, to really start casting out what I want. Otherwise, they're just not going to be, they're not going to be biting.
Yeah, sluggish. They'll come up to feed it, and when it cools off a bit at night. I mean, what kind of fish you got there then?
Well, for where I mainly fish for like the channel is just the pond on the property, and so it's mainly smallmouth bass and sunfish. But to my surprise, and I caught it on camera for one of my videos, is that we also have catfish in there, which is nice. So in the area, that's normally what I'm fishing for, is bass or catfish.
Yeah, well, for me it'll be like cod in the winter months, and codling, and then like now it'll be mackerel, and then you get like whiting and flatfish, flatties all right. I mean, I tend to get flatties like in this particular era. I mean, I I fought it because the sea bass fight quite a bit, but I had one flatty. It wasn't even that big, but it put up one hell of a struggle. And then eventually it slipped the hook, and it had been such an epic battle that I was chasing it through the waves. I was trying to set the dog on it. I was trying to get the dog after it like it was a rabbit running through the waves. You bastard, come back here! But right now, everybody will be bringing in the mackerel, I think.
Yeah, I can relate though. People ask me all the time. They're like, "Well, you should really put the original audio for your fishing videos up on so people can hear like the nature and the sounds like that." And I tell them every time. I said, "I really don't need to do that because you're just going to hear me swear or get spurg out about when I'm reeling something in time and time again. I don't think you want to hear me just angrily swearing at people as I'm trying to untangle a line or I'm trying to fight with the bass that's giving me trouble. It's just that's one of the things I just can't do.
I
It's
mean,
just
I, it's weird because like it's like doing salt fishing and you're doing fresh water, so we're kind of a little bit at odds because you don't have to worry about the tides, and I was amazed at how much of a factor that played into it. I hadn't considered it, but even then, once I'd sorted that out, I actually did an old blog post on this on the original Morgoth review me blog because it was such a like a revelation because I was going down. Um, I started like fishing with the tide when I was supposed to, but even then it was a problem because I was just being constantly snagged because the north where I go is quite rocky, it's quite and there's a lot of kelp and stuff. Um, well, that particular spot it was, and so I was constantly getting snagged and I was losing all of my rigs and everything and it kind of annoyed us. And then another time I was walking past there. I wasn't fishing. I just happened to be walking past, and I noticed that the tide was like way out, way out. And so I looked down, and all of a sudden I'd had like a revelation because I could actually see what I was casting into. So it was like I could see that there was one area where I'd lost a weight or I'd lost some the rig had got hooked and all I got snagged and I could see all of these different areas. And it was all of a sudden it was just like now I understand. You know what I mean? It was like a complete revelation. It's like, well, now I can actually see the lay of the land. And then I discovered that there was a kind of big sandbank. And I remember because when I casted that direction, everything was fine. And then that's when I began to get the flatties because then I went back and I was like, well, okay, now I'm armed with this knowledge of what's actually what I'm fishing into, what the lay of the land is. I can do it properly, and so bit by bit, you kind of get it. You know what I mean? At first, it's a nightmare, and I made every mistake you can imagine. And then you go back and you think, well, okay, now I know exactly which direction to cast in, and I'm not going to get snagged or anything. And I just thought that was a really strange thing because to spend all that time sort of look just gazing at the surface of the water and you're casting into it, but you don't have a faintest idea what's actually down there. You don't know that there's rocks there. You don't know that there's a big sort of crevice or that there's a big sea of kelp or whatever it is. And then when you see it, like the curtain's being pulled back, and I thought, by God, this, and then then I went back, and that's when I ended up getting a few flatties there.
yeah, plumbing the depths with the water helps a lot. Like with fresh water, the pond may not be that issue, but if I go down to like one of the lakes or I go to the river, I got to pay attention to the tide and current, so I know the direction in which I'm casting and how to play it. That way, I can, if I'm using something like a top water, I can play it along with the current, so it makes it sound like I'm going against it, making it more appealing because it looks like the bait is struggling up at the top of the water it's a good thing to learn how to play it with. I mean, even in the pond, I mean, when I first started figuring it out, because it's not as clear as you want it to be unless you're near the shore. Yeah, you start to get a handle for it real quickly. Like, okay, there's a bunch of like growth over here that I have to avoid, or I'm going to get constantly stuck on something. Over here is pretty good, but I also know to the right maybe where all that growth is. That's also a place where they tend to either spawn or be around, so I have to just know to finesse it very carefully or use the right kind of bait. It makes it all more important about sort of the equipment you choose. You can't just sort of slap something on there and assume that it's going to be easy or universal for whatever you do. There's a reason why there's so many different forms of bait and tackle for this reason, because it's not just something that's going to be the jack of all trades for whatever you're going for.
Yeah, I mean, I was recently told that I'm still doing it. Thing is, I've never pretended to be like an expert fisherman, and I'm not. I'm not like. I think when you're humble in that regard, you can kind of take it on the chin, and you can just kind of take advice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so the same uncle, actually, he's still alive, and I ran into him because there was a funeral recently, and he was saying, "How's the fishing going?" And I told him my kind of poultry haul over the last year or so, and he was saying, "Well, and how are you? What are you doing? What's going wrong here?" And we're going to go soon, and he was saying that I'm staying in the wrong place. Like basically, you fish an area for a couple of casts, maybe half an hour, and if there's nothing biting, then just move further down. Don't just sit there, like don't just sit there daydreaming all day. You know what I mean? Sitting there thinking about like being and time and all of this, and like how are you having this transcendental thing? Like get off your arse and then head down further down because the fish will be there somewhere. You've got to go and find them. They're not just going to come to you and jump on your hook.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, you can't just sit. I mean, it's easy though, right? That's the thing, is that it's easy sometimes, even if there's nothing there that's on the line. It's just nice to sometimes sit there or stand and just not really think about anything else. That's sort of the thing that I do when I go out, and most of the time I'm not out to record or anything. I'm just out there to be away from my phone or my desk for just hours away. It's just that's sort of the thing for me, is that I can just sort of forget everything for a little bit, because out where I live, if I go past a certain point, like my cell reception drops down to zero. So it's really just there to check the time. And even if I'm, out there for 30 minutes, it really feels like 3 hours. But yeah, I mean, if I go to the lake, then if you're casting in the same place 2 or 3 times and you're not getting anything, it's just time to pack up and move.
Yeah, yeah, it's the same. It's the same with the sea. So you give it a half an hour. There's nothing there. You're just going to have to move down. But it's tempting for me because like that's exactly what I do. Like I'm kind of like, oh, this is so great. I've got a nice setup. The fish aren't biting, but like, do I really want to? There's other people down there, and I'm nice and comfy here, and there's nobody around. Like maybe they will come up. You know what I mean? But I kind of got past that, especially with the spinning rod, which is much more active. You've got to be casting and playing the line all of the time, so it lends itself to more movement than when you've got the whole kind of beach cast setup, which is a bit of a chew. Another problem I've got is that the damn dog tries to take the bait, and like at the end of the day, like I haven't got money to take a dog to the vets and get like a treble hook removed from its mouth. So it's like once it's in, and then that's all. That's all it is. But I think even the fishing is a sort of a kind of thing. People who watch me videos and whatnot, they may see like a running kind of thing where with the sea. I've got like a deep love and obsession with the sea. I think it might be an English thing. I mean, one of the stories I like, you can say if it's true or not, is that when you look at the different ethnic groups from Europe, when they went to America, you found that the Germans headed inland towards the woodlands, and then you get the Scots, which I think is in Appalachia, which is kind of rolling hills and woods, and then like the English settled along the coastlines. Is that like a real thing?
I mean, I'm pretty sure I'd have to probably pull up Albion's Seed again and see whether or not all the fishermen stayed along the coast. But I mean, it's definitely a New England sort of deal where you get the word fishmonger a lot for those that work for it. But I mean, Yiz lives in Appalachia. And she and Chad is definitely saying yes. But I mean, it also just kind of turned into this more corporate culture kind of deal where it's very much commoditized too, because like I said earlier, it's just you got your Bass Pro Shop, your Cabela's, your Gander Mountains, everything sort of all like that is just for us in the country, like in Texas and the South, it's still a big deal, but it's more of that backwoods, find a creek or throw a line over a bridge type deal. But yeah, the Englishman really of New England, that's still where it's at.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of you having a sort of spiritual bond with a certain landscape which just runs in your blood, because it's purely like the opposite of a kind of I think it's a sort of right wing kind of thinking that I like, which because to like the standard shit lib today, well, for a start, fishing in itself from just a standard sort of materialist modern view makes no sense at all. Like, because at the end of the day, you can sit there for 3 hours and come away with nothing. And the response today from the enemy camp would be like, well, I can just go and buy a fish from the supermarket. Like, well, why would you do that? I kind of think of a worst waste of time. But at the same time, I can sit there and have like a kind of affinity with the sea. Even just the smell of the sea. If you go down and like the tides out, yeah, it's as if the seabed releases all of these kind of salty, briny smells, and I just really like all of that. And I can understand that a German may like have that same feeling, but if he's in like sort of the mountains, forested mountains or something like that.
Probably. I mean, I've met like when I lived in Germany as a kid. I mean, we met fishermen there, and they sort of taught us the lay of the land or their way of fishing. But I mean, it was always in a forested area, and my dad really got along with them because my dad's side of the family's from Wisconsin, so there's all the sort of ice fishing to do in the winter. And when you take like a vacation down to Bavaria and you're near the Alps and you're at like the IBC and you can just be in a place where people can deal with the winter fishing or deal with sort of that cold weather. It's natural to them. That's their climate and something that my dad could definitely relate to in that regard. But for me, when I'm out there, I mean, it's getting my hands into the dirt or simply just like washing them off, dipping your hand real quick in the water. It's part of the land that you live on. It's that sort of earthly reminder that this is something that you're supposed to take care of. It's something that I'm supposed to be a part of. It keeps me anchored to a world where almost everything these days constantly requires you to be on your phone. And it's nice that even if I'm away for like 3 hours in the afternoon, I'm at a place that feels like, I'm doing something that my father would have done and my grandfather would have done. It's like you said, it's like it's very right wing where it's this is a familial ancestral connection, not just to the land, but also just to the activity itself.
I mean, it, for me in particular, even like the waves and everything, I've got like a maybe one day I'll write this down, but I've got a kind of half thought for a video. That there's something about the sea which is like permanent, because if inland, the landscape on the land changes like all of the time. Really, I mean, the forests could get chopped down, or the you could find that there's like a McDonald's on your favorite hill walk, or whatever it happens to be. Probably a little bit less so around like waterways and riverbanks, but the sea doesn't really change at all. So when the sea's coming in, it's like if you go down to the shoreline on shale, you're basically seeing the exact same thing happening, which has happened for thousands and thousands of years. Like, it hasn't really changed at all. I also liked the idea that, well, from where I am, I'll be sitting on, say, a rock or on the northeast coastline, Northumberland, and directly across from me will be Denmark. And I like the idea that there's like a Danish fella sitting Like, if you could just travel across for a couple of 100 miles or whatever it is, like there's going to be like a Danish fella who's looking across, thinking across there's England, and there's an English fella sitting there, and you're both kind of sitting on opposite sides with your own fishing rods. So this kind of thing, these kinds of thoughts, there's a certain poetry to it all, which I like, especially like even like to get back to the fishing itself, even the ceremony of setting things up, even the ceremony of like sort of pulling the line through and then getting the knots right and hooking on your bait, and there's a whole kind of thing to it, which is more of a well, it's a very white kind of hobby to have. You'll see it elsewhere as well. People used to build like cathedrals of matchsticks and things like that. And I think when yeah, and then to get all of that ready and to just sit back and just like pay close attention to the tip of the rod, which kind of becomes your whole world in a way. Unless you've got a floater. I saw somebody in the chat talking about floater. I mean, I actually use one of them as well, sometimes. But yeah, it's the same thing. You'll just be like sort of obsessed about the floater, and it does strange things to your consciousness as well.
Yeah, I was using a floater yesterday when I was recording, and it's a bit of hypnosis where it constantly becomes the only thing that your eyes and your mind can focus on. You're just waiting for that pull and that dip down where you know that the wind is blowing, so that it's moving in a certain direction because you can feel the breeze on the left side of your face. And so you're like, okay, it should be going in that sort of direction. It should be heading towards the right. But then if you see it pull to the left, then you've got a bite going for it. Or like I mentioned earlier with the sunfish, they're usually too small for you to really get the hook on it, but they'll go for the worm and just nibble away. Although I did get one that my audience will see on camera, because he's just this tiny little thing, probably about the size of my, like, from the palm of my hand to the tip of my fingers, and like there's half of the worm sticking out of his mouth, and then just somehow he's managed to bite onto it. But it just becomes a part of who you are. And you mentioned it's sort of like this very white hobby, and I mean, for me it's definitely just something that I know that it just innately is here in America, where it's just like I don't find, unless you're like maybe in Florida or something like that, but like for where I live, what gets called flyover country, it's a hobby we all share, and that we've all got our own gear, and we know that it's not really anything that's been completely sort of destroyed by global homo in that regard.
I think as well. I mean, I mentioned when I did the kind of the stocked pond fishing that I didn't like at all, because I just think it does it was just like a slaughterhouse, and I wasn't comfortable with it. But at the same time, even when you catch a fish, it's not always pretty, and I think you're kind of getting back into touch with nature, which people on the right always talk about, but sometimes that's quite unpleasant. I mean, it can happen that a fish like swallows a hook, and you hear it. Another thing is, like, they do gasp for air and everything when you bring them up, so you've got to end their suffering. I'm not like some kind of weird sadist or just unconcerned about these things. And so you have to be mature about these things, and you have to like step up, because at the end of the day, like, it's your responsibility, it's your fault that this thing's on the line. And even if you got like a little one, and you were going to throw it back because there's not much you can do with it, like, it's still your responsibility to not behave like a sadistic bastard. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's something that I actually wanted to bring up, because Semiagog has harangued me all the time, because so when I record it on the pond, I do toss them back. But it's also just something that I was taught as a kid, just about conservation. Like, you don't, if you're only going to take what you can eat, like, do that and then take the rest back. Or if you've reached the limits, you have to toss them back. And he had tweeted at me yesterday. He said, is it like a rom-com where it ends with the part of the wedding, or do you just show the fish the snuff film part that happens after you hook them? And it's sort of that lighthearted bit, but I think that you're right, that when you do pull it up, there is a hook in its mouth. You have to make sure, especially if you are going to toss it back, you have to really make sure that you're not leaving it bleeding or anything, because I mean, if not, then you definitely got to take it out of its misery. And there's that. And I mean, I use like my bare hands. I don't have a glove or anything. So like when you lip the fish, right, you grabbing the lower lip to help get the hook out. you got to make sure that you're really in touch with it in terms of nature. I mean, I hate it when I gut hook a fish, because it's just like, I know this thing's internally bleeding and I'm not going to be able to save it. It'll probably die in like a couple hours inside of the water. So I got to like take that one out of its misery as quickly as I can. But like I can feel it every time. So like one of those good feelings you get when you're out fishing is that if your thumb has got that sort of, indented roughness from, bite, or, pressing down on the lip of a fish, that it's been a good day. But it's also that like real raw reminder that I'm with nature. And I grew up with like Boy Scouting and camping all over in Europe when we lived overseas and in America. So it's just, I kind of just grew up with that outdoorsy culture, despite looking like a rootless cosmopolitan in a lot of ways. So, yeah, I definitely know what you mean.
I mean, the thing is, it's not like the fish that are being hauled up in like industrial factory ships are having a better time of it, because then there's no kind of personal touch whatsoever. It's just like, it's, they come up and like, either there's like thousands on those hooks, or they just get sort of hauled up in a giant net. And then it's just like an automatic processing plant. And I find that actually worse than like a man taking responsibility and like ending its life in like old school way. There's some, and so then the people go and like kind of buy their fish from the supermarket, and they've like completely lost touch. Like, that's just a slab of meat. That was never an actual living thing. Like, they don't think about the fact, they're never confronted with the fact that the piece of fish that they've bought, like, that would have struggled against the net. That would have struggled for its life to get away from what was facing it. So I'm not really buying this kind of, and this kind of sort of modern liberal bullshit where it's, you're being cruel or something like that. Not when they're going to go along to the supermarket and just buy something which somebody else killed, somebody else confronted it. Somebody else can be responsible for the nasty stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same way with hunting too. I mean, even when I'm dealing with hogs with my dad on the land, even because Texas has got a nasty wild hog problem. It's an invasive issue. And we'll unload and we'll take care of as many as we can. But I mean, even if they're bleeding and writhing on the ground, it's your responsibility to put these things out of their misery as quickly as possible. Like, you do have a responsibility. I mean, when they buy it from the supermarket, or they say, well, why don't you just go and do it? I mean, all that you're doing is separating yourself from like that moral responsibility, that culpability of taking care of the animal and making sure that you put it out of its misery quickly and that its death is painless. I mean, one of the things that, I was always told as a kid is just that you always go when you go fishing, especially if you're doing catch and release, is you got to bring a set of pliers with you, because you don't want to, be struggling for like minutes while it's literally asphyxiating out of the water. You got to get that hook out as quickly as possible and put it back in. So,
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, it's I mean, I was going to get into maybe a little bit of Heidegger later, but there's so much about fishing that reminds me of my kind of rudimentary understanding of Heidegger's thought, because he was very much about getting back to the land and getting the close at hand, and knowing, like, being familiar with your surroundings, and all of this. But another aspect of it is the quantity, the standing reserve. And so if you, I mean, it's not just fishing; it's the same for hunting in general. But so what happens is, if you let's say you pull a nice big cod out of the sea, there's no way you're going to throw that back. That's really top grade food. So you have to kill it, and then you're going to have to make sure. Another thing is, you're going to have to make sure that you prepare it right. You're going to have to make sure that it's well gutted. You're going to have to make sure that it's filtered properly. You don't want to waste any of the meat. And you're responsible for all of this, but you've also come in contact with it yourself, with your own hands. But when you, like, what they say the moderns want, what they prefer is, as we just said, to have everybody else do that for them. But then that what it does is that the fish changes from being something where you've had like a kind of experience with it in the real world, to just a quantity. It's just and they won't even they don't even like count the fish in numbers of individual fishes. They count them. They'll count it like a whole by weight. So the fish, when you catch it, is like is an animal that you've taken from the sea. You have responsibility for, and then because of that kind of connection, you feel a very heavy responsibility. You want to get the meat properly. You want to, you know, treat it right, prepare it right. So then when you get it home, you'll think, well, I need to make a proper dinner with it. It needs to be worth it. So it's got this value to it. But when the fish is just a quantity, just a mass, then it becomes just kind of it just becomes reduced to offal. It's just it's just fodder then.
Well, this is my issue with I always find it this interesting contradiction. Not that I'm upset when like your average sort of blue check shitlib on Twitter will complain about factory farming or the animal cruelty that exists with like cages and things like that. Because I really do feel for it, especially because I take care of animals like that. I hate seeing chickens in like in cages that are only meant for one, but there's like five in there and they're covered in their own excrement and molting feathers. And I mean, I feel for it, but at the same time, I'm like, this is the stuff that that they would rather consume or just go to the store and buy it. And when you separate yourself from nature, I think it becomes really easy to no longer put things into a proper context. Like where oh, I can just go buy the meat or buy the fish at the store, and they don't. It almost dehumanizes the very aspect that you're a human being. We have a relationship with nature is man, right? Like we're supposed to be stewards of the earth, and they treat it as this climate change deal where it's got to be about oh, these coefficients or all these models. It's all computerized and digitized on these spreadsheets about how we can predict things, but never running their hands through the silt and the dirt and the water, and making sure that you've gutted it right, you filleted it right, and that you're going to take it home and either put it in the freezer and make sure that you have a good meal or dinner over with it with someone.
Yeah, it's a mechanized process. So, I mean, I hesitate. I hesitate to go too far on this, but to a certain degree, like these big industrial ships, they're the people who work on them are not exactly getting their hands dirty that much either. But I do hesitate with that because the fish are usually gutted and processed and all that. Somebody still has to do all of that stuff. But there's a difference between sort of looking on your radar on a computer to see where a school of fish is, and then just kind of doing it old school where you've got to plumb the depths as it is. You've got to just have a feel for these things, the kind of stuff which Moby Dick goes into detail about.
Yeah, but maybe to get it back a little more on fishing, it's another thing that I just really appreciate since getting back into it in the last few years now has just been the fact that I'm alone with my line, and I just that's all I'm paying attention to, or I'm going back even when I spend like 3 hours and I don't get anything. It's just a pleasure to be away from it all, and I'm sort of lost in the sounds, especially like when you're about 20 minutes in, right? You're not getting anything. It doesn't really matter because I can look around and I can look up and I can see the sky, and it's I still live in an area where the sky isn't really that hazy from urban living or factory or anything like that, and so I've got that going for me, and I'm surrounded by trees, and the hill where I'm at, where the pond is, it's just I'm finally in a place where it all feels right. Where I'm not thinking about my phone or Twitter notifications. When I'm there and I'm in a completely different headspace.
Yeah, I mean this is the kind of thing which fascinates me is that like what is that feeling of contentment? Because I don't think it's just fishing that does it. I think have you ever if you go camping and you stay sort of late at night, you may have like a little campfire and it's just kind of the embers are still going and you're sitting around in the woods. and you get this kind of profound feeling that you're just at ease and you're just in your own skin, and you're just kind of, you know what I mean? Everything just seems right. And there's something similar with that with fishing. And I think it isn't the case with yoga, but I think what it is um, you're in. So obviously you're in a tranquil place. You're in a place where you could, which is stress free anyway. But I think there's something to be said that when you've got something to take your attention away from your surroundings, which it can be a float out of the tip of a rod, or it can be like a bonfire, or a little campfire late at night, or maybe it's in a slightly different way. People who go mountain climbing and then they are in that zone where it's like everything else. The point is, everything else gets kind of blocked out. And I think this is a big thing. I think this is important to think about. This is a sort of, again, I mentioned like the highlight thing, where it's kind of like all of the background noise is kind of, it goes away, and so what it is you're present. You're actually present with yourself there. But the problem with that, and why I don't think it works for yoga, is that when you're doing yoga, you're conscious of the fact that you're, say, meditating or whatever it is. So what happens is that when you're then, so you can get this like effect where it's like pointing two mirrors against each other, and it just goes on and on and on. Because if you're then conscious of the fact that you're engaged in, say, this meditation, then it kind of breaks the spell on it because you're one step removed from it. But when it's say in fishing, you're sitting there, but you're actually concentrated on something else. Um, and I think that the over, but everything else gets sort of shut out. And I think that's why you feel more present and more at ease and more stress free, because on our day to day lives, normally there's like 20 different things going on at once. There's always something demanding your attention, even to the degree of time itself. I've often noticed that time seems to slightly change when you're fishing. It seems to, once you get there, like you say, when you get settled, and you're relaxing and you're just watching the rod or your floater, like time itself seems to kind of change. It seems different, because you're no longer operating by the world clock, by the kind of, but by the standard kind of, especially when it's sea fishing, because you're going by the tide. But you're kind of operating under a new set of rules, and your consciousness is kind of slightly changed, if that makes any sense. And I think this is why I read out those quotes before, and they were kind of scratching at that as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're not hooked on to sort of I want to say like the machine. Like I'm not constantly checking my phone or my oh, I have to do this in 30 minutes, or oh, I've got a phone call in an hour or so. Like there's some that sense of attention where my mind is completely focused on, okay, I'm going to cast here, or okay, I just saw something come up and ripple the water a little bit. For as everyone's making puns in chat, you do get hooked on it to where you're just purely paying attention to where you're going to be, or to where the line is at, and what you can see sort of following it along, or seeing what's bubbling up on the water. And it's just something that you can lose hours to. And even when you're finished up and you're putting all your stuff away and you're going to walk back to your car, or your the walking path or whatever from the beach, and it's just like, wow, it felt like 4 or 5 hours. And then you like check your phone, or you finally turn your key into the ignition and your car turns on, and it's like, oh no, you were really only there for like an hour or a little bit more than that, which is something that really just stills my mind in a lot of ways. I'm completely forgotten about everything, and it's just, that's the nice part about it, is that I'm extracted from the modern world in that regard, like almost as if everything that I do in real life, or oh, this stream has gone on for like 3 or 4 hours, it's just, there's something that I can't really put my finger on. It's just like I've returned to the earth.
Yeah, yeah. I think time plays a big part in it. So there was something that I just wanted to touch on, that I mentioned before. So this is a sort of like an academic thing on Heidegger, and it says time is the ultimate value that makes these things authentic and meaningful. My grandmother vested her time to knit the sweater instead of just buying it. This is kind of like what we touched on before. So if you've gone out and you've actually uh, even if it was like caught a fish basically, but hunted and caught an animal, you've invested your time in that. So this is why it feels more valuable. And this is when if you've because I mean it'll get onto it here. The reason why time is a thing so much is because time is you don't have an endless amount of time. Then this kind of seems paradoxical when you're talking about fishing, because a lot of people would say that fishing like is a waste of time. Like you're literally spending maybe, I mean, for you in fresh water, perhaps like a whole day. But on the sea fishing, you'll get like 2 hours up, 2 hours down kind of thing. But basically, it's still a lot of time to be doing absolutely nothing. Especially then, if you're going to say, well, time is it because you're going to die one day. There's a finite amount of time that you have. If you then invest some of that time in doing something, then it becomes more precious because of it. And this is why kind of working 70 hours a week in a job is kind of soul destroying in a way, because that's time that's just been commodified and turned into like as a commodity. It's turned into monetary value instead of it being your time to do what you want. So what's happened is, as you were saying just there, you kind of extricate yourself from that entire paradigm, and that's why it begins to feel so great. And he says the band chose to be in my city at that particular time instead of being somewhere else. It is time that makes everything non negotiable. In my limited life, I can only do this instead of that. I can only be here instead of there. If life were endless, I would be able to eventually do everything and be everywhere at some point. Authenticity and time are interlinked. The fact that one's own life is finite, the most valuable investment one can make for others and oneself is their own time, and this is what creates meaning and value. But authenticity and meaning are lost as soon as time is attached to an exchange value, as the clock, money, technology, or anything else. They transform the definite choices we make in time into something negotiable, non-definite, and therefore less meaningful and less authentic. They are the instruments that obscure the finitude of time and create an illusion of infinity. And I think when you're fishing, um, it's that's this is why there's a strange connection between sort of being present, being in your own skin, having all of these worries and all of these concerns just blotted out, and then you've got the extra thing of like time. So it's kind of like the supreme amount of agency in modernity in a way is where you're going to say, I'm going to sink 6 hours into sitting by like a stretch of water in the vain hope that I'll catch a fish. It's a sort of it's kind of like the ultimate reactionary response to modernity, which is all about like being on time, and you gotta, you time is money and all of this kind of thing. It's to just say, well, I'm gonna sit on a riverbank for no good reason for 6 hours. It's kind of like the ultimate revolt against the modern world.
Yeah, I was about to say that that is sort of the ultimate revolt there. Yeah, no, I have the article up shared on screen, and I can't help but agree with this sort of take here and sort of explaining being in time. Where I had a video out actually not too long ago, and I'll be honest, I have not read a lot of Heidegger, and I know that he is one of those guys that you need a guide for, but um I wrote a while back, and you had mentioned Henry David Thoreau, and it was I had a video called "Finding Your Walden," and I tell people that one of the reasons why I do the fishing and I look for that reason to be out with nature is because it's sort of an escape from everything else that you do. Like the article says that, what, but authenticity and meaning are lost as soon as time is attached to an exchange value such as the clock, money, technology, and everything else. Like that's what I think about it, because once I'm doing something like a live stream, or I'm, just recording something, or I'm editing something, like you'll see this a lot with, say, like Academic Agent and Unpopular Opinions. They're like, okay, we don't want a 4 hour stream this time, guys, and so because you're putting a time value on it as well. And when I'm out there, it doesn't feel like it. I've lost all semblance of what time is. And like you said, we're always ignorant of the time of when we're going to be. And I think that's sort of the meme I see a lot, where it's sort of the soy jack sitting on his hospital deathbed, and he has his like final words that he croaks out to nobody in the hospital room, because he didn't have a family, and he's just like, I wish I could have bought more Funko Pops or something. And I'm just thinking to myself, that's sort of the aspect of modernity, where it's just like you have your material things, but is it really worth your time? Whereas for me, I can be out fishing for what feels like 6-7 hours. Even if it's 3 hours, my perception of it is that it's so much longer. And if I'm on my deathbed, I hope to be surrounded by like wife, kids, and family, just being like, yeah, I wish I went fishing more.
And it feels longer and more than what it is, because it has meaning to it, which isn't financial, and it isn't monetary. And that's kind of like the point there, which I think it's a deep one. Is that because we get into this mode where it becomes automatic. So this is the problem, where your normal kind of consciousness, your normal way that you go around your day-to-day life, you aren't kind of properly present. You are, it's, well, I've got to go to work, and then there's all the tasks that go to work, and then I've got to pick the wife up, and then I've got to go and pay this bill, and then even just that the minor things, the minor distractions around the house. So all of this is which is the greater bulk of our lives, and especially in modernity, all of this is when we aren't actually really there. We aren't actually ourselves, just in the moment. And of course, this is exactly what fishing allows you to do for a long, long time. In the same way, I would say, as something like watching the fire late on campfire, in the woods late at night, or something like that. It's not like we think, well, it's this relaxing thing to do, but I don't. When you begin to mull it over, you come to some quite sort of reactionary positions. I mean, it's just a passing thought, but it's interesting that, like, a lot of revolutionary movements, kind of, they too are aware of a problem with time, and they'll reset the clock to zero or something like that. I think they did in the Khmer Rouge, like year zero, and I can understand like what they're trying to do there, because it is like the ultimate revolution is to just break the cycle of time itself and just completely start over. But the problem is, in the sort of industrial society that they'd create, they're just creating the exact same problem over again. It's just that they've started the clock from zero. But all of the conditions that led to the enslavement in the first place are still there. So you can see how truly world changing it would be if you thought, well, hey, there's a sort of anarchistic element to it. I'm not sure if it's even possible, if I'm honest.
I don't know either. Although I know that anthropologists have done like they've tried to study like indigenous tribes in like the Amazon, and their concept of time isn't anything how we would perceive it linguistically, which of course that affects the way that they view the world, right? To construct a language around how you perceive it. But I don't know if you could really, it maybe in the West, ever try and break that, because I mean, both with like paganism and Christianity, there is always like death has a part of it. There's a finality to it, and we're always unaware of when it comes. But there were a few comments in chat that kind of stuck out with me. It's like that time isn't a real price that you pay; it's with your soul, with regards to consumerism, and that comes from our Scandinavian friend, the Walrus. And I think that's kind of got a good point there, where we pay a lot of things with our soul. And I think that there are
Yeah.
very few times where I don't think about my time or my how much time I've spent on something. Like I don't care that usually like divine liturgy at church goes like well over an hour and a half. I don't care about that because it's good for the soul. The same thing with fishing. I don't care if I'm out there for 90 minutes or 6 hours spending a whole day by the lake. It's just it's a place for me to spiritually recharge from my batteries from just the monotony of the day-to-day life.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is that. So it's quite. It is like the question is then if you could make that like I just don't see how you could have a functioning society if everybody was in such a kind of relaxed mode, and it's a kind of tragic thing. I mean, I think the obsession with time imposing itself on people, I think that is a thing of Western civilization primarily. There's you can go all the way back, but just like the clock on the church tower. You know, I don't want to get all like Spangler, but the time thing is very much of Western Faustian civilization. The other one where it was a very strong component was the Egyptian one, but then the opposite of that would be the Indian civilization, where their kind of their symbol was like the world as a dream, life as a dream, or whatever. And they barely had any kind of understanding or concept of time whatsoever. Certainly not the way we did. But so what's happened then is that this kind of we're kind of shackled to time, and then the commodification of time, and then machines, which are then it's like another layer of it with technology and machines, which are also hooked into this kind of time schema. And so when you go fishing, you've rejected that whole paradigm, and what you do is kind of change your consciousness. That I know it sounds all kind of pretentious and everything, for like basically sitting on a rock dangling a line in some water, whatever. But it is that, and I think it does have that. It is like that. And I'm not saying it's only for fishing either. There's probably other things out there, and what people will literally call pastimes. So in like modernity, having a hobby or having a pastime, it's kind of looked down upon, and it's kind of sneered at, because it's like, well, that should be a secondary thing. It's something that you do when you're not working and you're not making money and you're not like producing and consuming. You get this pastime where, I mean, by and large, even the pastime themselves have been kind of absorbed into the main grid. So even your pastimes usually amount to you buying things or consuming things or going on a holiday where you can spend all of the money that you've saved up for wages. And so the beauty of fishing is that it's just completely non-productive, really.
I mean, well, isn't that the whole thing about pastimes? Is that these are things that we do to pass the time? I mean, it's just for me, it's like, yeah, this is definitely a pastime, and I think that and for us, especially fishing nowadays, because everything is so commodified. And you mentioned Heidegger, but I mean, for me, I think about like the accelerationists, and I think about sort of like Paul Virilio about the faster and faster we make things, and the faster and faster we invent things to do, we're more likely to have like a society wide accident of some sorts, or these events that'll happen because of time and how fast we accelerate. That these things can lead to disaster. And I do think that we're in that sort of route with modernity that things have to be produced faster, things have to move faster and faster, especially when it comes to like even the more incessant things like with computer games, like, oh, I've got to be able to make sure that my computer is as fast as it can with its boot time to start, so I can start, either getting on a game or something like that. And it's just always about spending your time on these things that are rather, to me, in the long term, does it matter? Like you just bought, like something for like $3,000 to go play video games that are like 30 years old at this point. I mean, but with everything about time, especially in the modern world where everything has to be done faster and faster and faster, we have to compartmentalize more and more of your soul to get these things accomplished. And yeah, it really is sort of a revolutionary act to say, screw that. I'm going to go fishing for 3 hours and I don't care because my phone can't get a hold of you.
And we kind of take it for granted as well, because like I say, even like the idea of a pastime is it has to be secondary. It's something which is not that important to you. And I've got sympathy for the view which is like that needs to come to the come to the fore. You know, there's that, I forgot his name now, but Todd Lewis has him on his stream. He did that famous clip where it was calling out the transgenders in a classroom or somewhere. Maybe somebody in the chat knows who I forgot his name. It's like a middle-aged fella with glasses and going slightly bald. But he comes from a kind of deep ecological perspective, and one of the reasons, of course, why these people have kind of fallen out with the modern left, because the kind of the modern shit lib left is hopelessly lost inside of the machine, to the degree where their pastime is not really a pastime at all. It's just still being locked in the consumer producer mode. And so if I mean, even leftists like Mark Fisher pointed this out about neoliberalism, about just the commodification of everything, where you're in this never-ending cycle, and it's something that the left have completely discarded. They don't know that they're in the machine. They don't know that their kind of consciousness is being molded by this process of production and consumption and money, which is all kind of interlinked together. And so it's funny because we instinctively know that fishing is a right-wing pastime. You know that Vaush is not going to go fishing for a day and just relax and switch off all of his devices and all of this kind of thing.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And maybe this is me going to rant and rave like an old man, but I think about like the machine in regards to like shipping, where you have like your Amazon Prime, like, 2-day shipping, where it'll be there. Sometimes it'll get there even earlier and it'll be there like within the day, or even if you order it really early in the morning, it'll be there by like 10 p.m. or whatever. And I just think to myself, like, it's such a convenience aspect that we take for granted in this modern life, where if someone mails me something through the post, and I'm just thinking like, well, the US Postal Service isn't the world's greatest thing, but I always get the joy because I don't know when it's going to be in the mail or not, like when it's going to be in my mailbox. Like I had a friend, as a gift, he mailed me an icon of Christ, and I was just like, oh, like, here's the tracking number, but I didn't, I didn't think about it because it's the Postal Service, it'll be here when it gets here. And there was that sense of excitement of not knowing when something was going to like finally arrive. Whereas, Amazon will text you and tell you like, oh, your package is here and here's the photo of where we dropped it off. And it's just, there's something lost there, I think, about appreciating time. It's tradition. I think that that's something that the right innately has, is that we are aware of like our limited finite time on earth, and we learn to appreciate time in between.
Yeah, yeah, and for me, it's sort of a from a sort of ideological perspective, I would bring this in to a general critique of modernity as it stands now, where it's like it's not just about this economic system versus that economic system. It's almost to the degree where the problem we have is that we have economic systems on all of these systems built within systems and built within systems, and then you are just like this mouse which gets to run around. And everybody knows of different political persuasions that this is a problem. Everybody knows that people are depressed, people are atomized, people are lonely. The people are. It's just not healthy because it's just so wrong. Like we have become like the battery hens. We have become those bastardized versions of what were once like healthy chickens, which would be pecking around in a farmyard. But and so much of it, so much of the problem is people don't know that they're enslaved, because they will say that they've got agency. But they never use it for anything. The only thing they ever use it for is sort of within the paradigm of the system itself. So, like, yet again, like to even not even just fishing, though I would say that is because of the other reasons which come with it. Where about how you can focus on the rod and you kind of You feel a sense of you feel so good in your skin. But even other non-productive activities is like an ultimate revolt against this health system. And I really dislike this. Well, I think it's interesting the way that the way that it's kind of looked down upon now. It's clever the way that that's slipped in. It's like, well, you don't want to be doing that. It's a waste of time, as if like doing a 12-hour night shift isn't. Because you're getting money. When I used to, I worked at a warehouse. But this was like all my career. I've had a long, long history of shit jobs. And when it came to overtime, I would always run into problems with the boss. And one of the issues was that so I'd work long hours all week doing dead end crap jobs in factories and warehouses, and then there'd be this pressure placed on me to stay longer, and then oftentimes come in on the weekend as well. Now the money would sometimes be like time and a half, or even double time. And a lot of the lads that I worked with, they were like, "Oh, this is amazing," and they were just doing like 70 to 80. They just lived there. And I noticed that, like, what got me was like, I would turn it down most of the time, and even in my gut, I would feel like, well, this is like £40 that I could have had, because it would be like a half day on a Saturday or whatever, and I'll be like, this is £40 that I could have had, but I haven't. And what have I done instead? And it usually wasn't anything productive. It usually, like, I'd like go to the pub the night before. I'd take the girlfriend out for a dinner and whatnot, and then just lie in on the Saturday morning. And I hadn't really done anything productive at all. But so when it came to argue my case to the foreman or the manager, like, well, what's so important that you've got to do? Well, nothing. I just don't want to be here. And so then it came to the point. Well, okay, so what about when the Sunday comes in and you're going to get double time then? And so really, what they're doing there, the interesting thing is, like, what's your price? What's your price to sell your soul to the machine? What's to where you can actually have the life that you want to live? But we're going to keep bribing, because there would be a price, of course. And that was all that always stuck in my craw, that I had to actually make that judgment. And I didn't really know why, because there's so many incentives placed on you to just work like a dog. But it was when I began to sort of read more sort of reactionary stuff that it finally came into place, that it's just an unnatural system.
Well, isn't that kind of what makes it Faustian, right? All these incentives to sell it all to sort of this machine. And it kind of is that bargain there of that sort of, we can offer you things to buy
Yeah.
material comforts, you know? Um, and that's sort of what I just think about this. But I mean, one of the things that kind of also reminds me on the topic of fishing, and just the fact that we have to care for these animals, and that it's a part of, being connected to nature, is that I do get upset, because I grew up with like scouting and things like that, and it's just, I get really upset about environmentalism being this just globo homo world governance deal about everyone's going to have carbon tax credits. And Zero HP Lovecraft wrote a great sort of satirical piece on the Green New Deal, where people would basically just remove themselves from the world to remove their carbon footprint. And he had this line about the ledger of actual carbon costs left acceleration. But all of this conversation really just reminds me of Lord Robert Baden Powell, the sort of the founder of scouting both in England and in America, where it's just all of these hand guides, because of his time out abroad as in military service, about scouting for boys, yarn for the scouts, and how to basically be a part of nature and how to take care of it and utilize it for what you want to do. And to me, it has always stuck out to me that's what kind of rubs me the wrong way, because it's like you're raised on things like leave no trace, and to leave the environment better than before you got there, and to take care of it because you're a steward of it. There's a very deep spiritual connection to the earth, and we're stewards over it. Now it's just like, screw this, we're going to make these we're going to make your cost of living ridiculously high, and no, you can't go fishing. We've banned it recreationally, so
And
you're left just to suffer.
and the sort of the sleight of hand and the word games they play. I remember a few years ago when I went the famous sort of Finnish right winger Pentti Linkala, and I forgot what the book's called now. I'm going to get shot down for that. But he has a great book, and he's just kind of in Finland, and he's looking at it. He's looking at the man management of Finland. But there's a part that always stuck with me, and it was that there was a huge swathe of forest, and it was like virgin forest. It was like ancient, really good forest. Which was kind of had its own mystique, and it had its own aura and magic. So we get back to this thing again about things being more than the sum of their parts, because on the kind of the technocratic spreadsheet, that was just lumber. And the idea that it was a kind of dense ancient woodland, it didn't really seem to come into the equation. So Linkela obviously campaigned to try and protect it. And what they did was chop down half of it and then replant in all of these lines, long lines, like fast-growing saplings of conifers or whatever it was. So then they were saying, well, on paper, nothing had changed. There was, and you know, strictly speaking, they were right. Like there was the same amount of trees there that there always been, or half the forest was just saplings now. But we've lost something. But so then, of course, a few years later, they went back and they cut down the other half, and then just planted more straight lines of saplings. But on the computer, nothing had changed, even though like you wouldn't recognize the place because it was different trees. It was all in straight lines. It was all just a sort of manufactured woodland now. But on paper, in the kind of mind of a technocrat, nothing had changed because they didn't actually take into account that the forest was more than just lumber and numbers. It was more than just a quantity. And this is the battle. So even these kind of the green agendas, which I really don't want to get started on, but even the thinking, I know, even the thinking behind that is it's something horrible. It's they come out with all of this kind of blather about how much they love the natural world, but it's kind of like taking the natural world and then putting it through a computer and digitizing it and then making that manifest in the real world. It's something completely warped and bastardized.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it kind of goes back to how this is really just this natural right wing tradition. I had found by unfortunately, just given the nature of my like, I'm a skinny guy, unfortunately, and I had been informed that there's this like YouTube channel with like 78, and it's like, always said jokingly in a fashion that like my alternative channel is this thing called Femboy Fishing, and it's just this person who is dressed like the stereotypical like pornographic femboy physique out there fishing in these like lakes and streams. And the one thing that I had laughed about this, because I clicked on one of these things at random, I'm like, I can't believe that this is real. And this person, of course, dressed like the bizarre creature that they are, got yelled at by a bunch of passersby in a truck. Like, who the hell is this? Like, you're out of place. What are you doing here? And I kind of find that to be sort of that sort of natural affirmation that like this is innately traditional and right wing. That like you can show up here in your thigh high socks all you want, you're still going to get heckled out of the pond or the stream.
Yeah.
So there you go. But with everything that they want to be green and like that, I just find it funny because what they want to do is deprive all sort of spiritual meaning to it. They can say, oh, we've done to save the environment according to this model and spreadsheet, or we've put the numbers in. And one of the things that I like Linkola a lot about is that he sort of recognized that there was that unique spiritual connection, and that the democratization process leads us to have like base consumer sort of, instincts to where we just want to buy at the destruction of everything that is, good and spiritual. And to me, it's just something that I think that provides fishing, like I mentioned earlier, is just that spiritual recharge of the battery. I feel my most authentic self when I'm out, just casting a line.
Yeah, I mean the really infuriating thing, which sort of to get back on the Linkla's woodland before, is this sort of ship of Theseus kind of sleight of hand that they do, where it's like, well, is it still the same woodland or isn't it? It's still got all of this, still as many trees there and all of this kind of thing. And they kind of do that on a lot of different issues, and it's so dishonest that it makes me sick, because nobody can see like a sort of a vast swathe of saplings, and even if some are like more sort of fully grown than the others, it isn't the same wood. There may be the exact same number of trees there, but it just isn't the same thing. And it's when you come to sort of defend it in more spiritual terms, it's we live in such a materialist age that people barely even have the language to understand that. And I think what we touched on about fishing before, it kind of touches on that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, out and about, I can cast my line, and I know that there's like you mentioned with the sea. The sea is eternal, right? The landscape can change, the hills can change, there might be a drought, and some of the rivers might be low for a few years, like it has been with the Rio Grande for like a decade. It's very rare sometimes when the Grande gets high enough that I can drive over to New Mexico and start fishing. But now it's like when I'm out fishing, it's just I'm a part of something that I know is intergenerational. I know that there's my family that's done it all this time, and it goes back to even my ancestors over in Europe. All of that is just innately part of this long-standing tradition that was man's connection to the land that he was on. And I think with this sort of like rewilding movement, or these planting all these trees, like do they even know that some of the trees that they're planting are invasive species that you're actually destroying even more of your local ecosystem? Like it just feels so they're in their attempts to feel good about themselves. Their reconstructed ship of Theseus is not even recognizable to what the original ship was.
Yeah, yeah, it's absolutely disgusting. I mean, on the trees as well. I did a video in the winter, I think it was, where I was kind of complaining of how severe the cutting back had been, and I got a ton of pushback in the comments, and they were saying, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Like this is normal." And they were saying, like, go back in the spring and like take a look at them then. And I was like, I was arguing in the comments. I was saying, I know they cut back. I know that they do that, but this is not like that at all. Like the main trunks of the trees have just been shattered. And so I did go back in the spring, and it was like just the same thing, except that so much of the wood was diseased. And I don't know what's going on with that, because it's the same in the video that I did. It was about the trees that they were bringing in, these Sitka things, which are from North America mainly, and they're planting them in the northeast, where, because they do grow fast, but their roots are really shallow. And you're getting a strong winds coming in from the North Sea in the winter, and they just all went down like dominoes. It was just everywhere you walk around in the woods now in the northeast, you just see like these big pyramids of logs of all of these trees that came down, and it was just like really it was because they're just not supposed to be in that soil, and they're not supposed to be in those conditions. And of course, when you're a bureaucrat working in it, will look great. The computer modeling will look great, and they do grow fast. So then they can reasonably think, well, they're going to grow so many feet per year. That means so much carbon reduction and all of this. And what's happened is that they've all just come down because they're not in touch with the land and the climate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's a video I did a while back about like just sort of American and European forests that they're supposed to be innately different, and yet they're planting things from North America over there now. It's just this sort of an ecological as well as political colonization of the old world that just it really rubs me the wrong way, because it's just like, they're not planting even if they were to plant trees in North America, they're not planting trees that are built to withstand the winds. Like, I live where you can get tornadoes and such, and it's just like, even in the nastiest 70-mile 90-mile an hour wind, it's just they can still stand up to the test of the wind. And instead they're just going for these fast growing disgusting things that only bring invasive species and diseases that will kill the old world. And it really is just depressing. And I feel like it's the same way when they talk about restocking or rewilding a lot of fish populations as well. It's just like they have no idea. There's no connection at all. They just say that this looks good on a spreadsheet, this looks good on a press memo that we can put out to the media like CNN or BBC, and it's depressing. Which again, why we go fishing, right? Is to sort of escape that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember on the pond that I didn't like, there was a kind of because where they came along in the golf carts, and what it was, that there was like an outlet, because otherwise the water would just go stagnant. So they had like an inlet and then an outlet, and I ventured over. I went to take a pee, so I had to leave the pond, and I noticed where the outlet was, and you could see that there was. So what had happened was that because so many trout got dumped in that kind of big pond, some of them eventually were finding their way through the outlet and into the main kind of stream. So they were going, like, kind of escaping and then going back into the wild. And I was looking at it and I was just seeing this, what then became like a kind of stream or a creek, like winding through the Flemish countryside, through the fields with trees over the top of it. And I just thought that's where I should be. If I got one of those fish, it would feel better. It would feel more spiritually nourishing than this thing that I'm doing here. So it's just that contrast there again. I also thought like the fish that escaped were like, like having like making fish babies and eggs and everywhere and like living in that. I thought they were like real heroes. They were like real chads to do that.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's something that I just think about all the time when it comes to like with like artificial ponds and like these big parks that they make for in city centers. Like in El Paso, there's this place called Escarate Park, and I know that they keep it stocked with fish, and I know that that's not the best environment for these fish to sort of grow in. But I mean, people can go fishing there if they want. And I'm always surprised to know that they don't have to restock it very often, that those fish do make it out to be sort of the best that they can. But as we get closer to sort of we're at the bottom of the hour, but I thought maybe a good way to dispense some white pills, because I think the chat is asking for it. Are there any particular spots that you've enjoyed the most since you've gotten back into fishing, or just something about your recent endeavors that you really do enjoy the most of?
Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons why I don't catch much is because I prefer the spinning rod, and the reason why I prefer the spinning rod is because you can play it. I'm gonna have to. I've got people on my back. It's a sort of people in my private life are starting to say, like, I understand you like the relaxation part, but you're gonna have to catch more than this. What have you had, like 2 flatties in 2 years, 2 flatties and a mackerel in like 18 months, and And so I'm going to start and get more heavily into the beach casting. I saw somebody in the chat said, like, have you do beach casting from the shoreline? This is the thing. I don't do it enough. Well, that's what I should be doing. But I just think the spinning rod is so much fun. And it can be, I mean, when I was a kid, I played golf as well. And 9 times out of 10, when you drove the ball, you'd get like it would slice, and sometimes it would just like you just hit the mud, and then sometimes it would just kind of skeet along the grass and flat. But every now and then you would drive it, and you could feel the ball kind of hit the face of the driver, like just perfect, and it was as if the ball just kind of went soft into and it would make this really kind of loud clack noise, and it would just fly and go for miles. And one of the reasons why I'm addicted to the spinning thing is because I love to cast out with it. I use like a heavy just straightforward kind of heavy silver bullet lure. And it's just this thing of like getting the perfect cast where like the tip of the rod does this kind of whiplash thing, and you can just see it fly for miles and miles, and then reeling it back in and kind of jigging it around in the water so that you can catch a fish. And when you get that cast right, it's just perfect. And it's as if you're another kind of Heidegger thing is that it's as if the rod is just part of your body, and it's just and not in a lewd way either, but just it's just spot on, and it makes it all worthwhile. You know, that's worth it. Just when you get that cast just right, that whiplash effect is. I mean, until the bail arm closes, and then I'm just waving it off to Denmark, like.
No, I can definitely relate to that. Like, especially when I'm on the pond. Like, I know that there are spots where I'm more likely to catch than others because we've been here for years now, and we just know where they're at. And there's that sort of like I love the splash of when the lure finally gets into the water. Just there's something so it's one of those like it's very pleasing to the ear. It's very hard to give an accurate description, especially if you toss the line just right when you cast it out, and you know that it's landing in the spot that you want it to, just that little side down to the right, and I know that's where they're going to be at. That's where I know I've seen them been popping up near the surface of the water to eat it, the insects that get in there. And I'm just like, it's that knowing that I'm at the right spot at the right time. There's really nothing better about it. And I kind of get how you feel when people give you flack for it, or like, because I know my chat and my audience does when I post a fishing video. They're like, well, how on earth does that pond have anything? He's like, what's not pictured in the cameras in the camera frame is that he's got a like a little handheld cooler full of frozen fish that he's just throwing in there. And I'm just like, well, that's definitely not the case. I've put more overhead footage for it now, but it's just that pleasure of knowing that you've had the perfect cast and it's in the exact right place where you need to be.
I mean, the floaters and under. I want to do more of that as well. I like the idea of just watching one of them bob around. So, hopefully my uncle is going to get a boat. So I'll have to get a new rod for that because it's a slightly different thing. I think you need a sturdier rod because he says the ones I've got will be no good. But then again, it's like he just revels and like sort of lecturing me, and I'm not doing anything right and all of that. But I did look that up. Like when you fish from the boat, what he means is that because you're going to be fishing at depth, and it means your rig and your weight on the bottom, it kind of multiplies in the amount of strain that it's going to put on the line and on the rod. So you're going to have something a lot sturdier. So that's what I'm hoping to get into soon.
Yeah, I know for those that do a lot of saltwater or boat fishing, especially from I've got friends in Florida. They tell me all the time, like, you need something that can really deal with the weight, because once you get something hooked in, that's a struggle that can go anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour, just that constant endurance fight of reeling in. But that's another thing that I do really love the most about, and I think that there's nothing that gets that sort of like primal lizard brain activated is when you finally do get something on the line and that fight begins to pull, and you're reeling it in, and you're just making sure that the rod's kept close to you. You got your arm going as fast as you can on the reeling it in. I love the struggle of seeing it in the water just fighting with me. It's just like it's that ultimate fight of man and nature right there. I've got my tool with me, my rod, and he's on the hook now, and that battle's begun. There's something that's just so innately primal about it that it always gets me going. And anytime I'm on the line, it's again another reason why I don't use the original audio is that I'm just like, all right, you son of a bitch, like, let's begin.
That moment when the tip of the rod just kind of bounces a little bit and you think, hello, hello, hello.
Yep.
And for me, it'll be like, is that just the waves, or is there something like hooked there? Did it just fall beneath some rocks, or what is it? And then it's just like, no, that's definitely a fish, and it just starts bouncing all over, and it's like, whoa, yeah, it's like, oh, emergency alert. You can hear the sirens going off in your mind.
Yeah, exactly. Or even when they've got or even when I get them close to the shoreline, or they'll just get off the hook, and I'll always leave off like I'm some sort of Bond villain waiting for the next encounter, like I'll get you next time, just next time, Agent Bond, and next time I'm gonna reel you in. You'll be hooked into my trap. It's every time that one gets away, it's like that.
I Yeah, it's all in my mind now. Everybody in the chat will be going out and buying fishing rods.
They should. I want if I ever take a sponsorship, it'll definitely be from fishing people. That's for sure.
I mean, um, I actually know where there is like a little stream in my area where there's a lot of trout in there. And it's a sort of, I don't know if you'll get a pass because it's a nature reserve, and yeah, I do, I saw somebody saying like, you can't just turn up in the middle of the day. You're gonna have to go in unsociable hours to catch fish, which is fair point. And I think I might get myself like a little sneaky sniper rod, like a little fly fisher or something, and then maybe set off at like 4 o'clock in the morning to this little place I know, to have a pop out of there when nobody's around. Because strictly speaking, I don't think I'm supposed to be fishing there, but I'll see how it goes. And this is the way of the future. This is how we're going to have to learn to survive by the looks of it.
Yeah, it'll start off as a revolutionary act, but then a necessary one, is we need to learn how to, go out in the middle of the night or early in the morning to go, fish from Mr. Gates's private reserve. It's a terrifying thought, but that's probably what's coming.
But I mean, people call it neo-feudalism. That's what happened in the old days. You know what I mean? Have like Bill Gates taking you to court because you stole some of his trout.
Oh man, yeah, our neo-feudalist age, where I'm put in the stockade for fishing in his lake. That'll be fun. But okay, I know that Unpopular Opinions is to start soon, so I'm gonna just briefly touch on these few super chats here, and then we'll get to the shilling. But Narco Republican just joined us, a new channel member. I appreciate that very much. Restoring Order for $3 US says, good afternoon. No, good afternoon, Pat. I appreciate you stopping by. His work over at Restoring Order, if you want to know sort of the inner workings of just how US politics day to day is going, sort of that rank punditry. He's been doing a really good job covering all that, J6 trial nonsense. So be sure to follow him. He also does really good interviews. Narco Republican for $2 says, amazing stream and incredibly chill. Thank you both. Well, again, I'm really glad that Morgoth could come on with today. He's the guy that really inspired me to start doing the real talk stuff anyways. And then last but not least, Lance Goebel, who's been a longtime supporter, says, I cannot wait for the next patron event where we'll be catching, cooking, and eating fish together at Prudentialist Ranch, complete with how-tos for us novices. Join us and donate now. Well, there is no ranch as of yet, but Lance has always been adamant that I whatever I catch, I should probably cook as a video one of these days. He's got his own little cooking club that he does with fellow dissidents. So maybe one day.
I was up further up the coast with Mrs. Morgoth a couple of years back, and she's one of the ones that gave me a hard time about the poultry catch, and I actually caught like a good sized shrimp, and she was like, well, what are you going to do with that? And I said, you're going to have it on a bit of toast for your tea. It's just the right size. You should stop complaining. That was it. I actually did it as well. Like, I'll spread it on a bit of toast. Nothing's going to go to waste.
That's right. Nothing goes to waste when we go fishing, and that's something that we should always keep in mind when we're out in nature. I'm always reminded of just this important phrase that we must always bear in mind the ignorance of our time of death. So be sure that you make that mental reminder to yourself to spend some time outside, and hopefully, if the stream has been anything, then maybe you'll go buy a fishing rod and go fishing one of these days. But Morgoth, again, thank you so much for coming on. And is there anything that you'd like to shill? I have your wonderful and amazing Substack link down below.
Yeah, well, that's it. There's all kinds of stuff going up on there that you'll find nowhere else. I mean, I've just yesterday, I think it was, posted the new Morgcast where me and Dave Martell are talking all about nerd culture and pulp fiction and sci-fi dystopias and stuff like that. And it's just up there for everybody to. It's also on Odyssey that you can go and find. And then I've got sort of you can articles that I do for the paid subscribers. I did one recently on the Tory party, Machiavellianism in the Tory party. And I do like solo podcasts sometimes. I'm going to do another one of them soon. So yeah, all my stuff and this stream soon will be going up on my Substack.
Fantastic. Well, if you're not supporting Morgoth, because his stuff that is behind the paywall is absolutely amazing, by all means, go check out the links down below and subscribe. And for everyone else, I do greatly appreciate you all tuning in. It's always important for us to get back to nature, and I think that fishing is the best way that we can do that. So, for everyone who's watching now, why don't you go click on another tab, get ready for Unpopular Opinions. I will be over there shortly. So, once again, thank you, Morgoth, for coming on. And to everyone else, we'll see you all next time.
All right. Cheers, folks.